How to prevent mosquito fish from spreading in water ecosystems. Preventing the introduction of the mosquito fish and removing its population are the most effective actions to control the dispersal of this exotic fish in ponds and lakes, according to a study published in the journal Science of the Total Environment. Neither the presence of predators nor the degradation of the quality of water and natural habitat are a threat to this invasive species, from the Atlantic coast in North America, which competes against and moves local species away. The new study, carried out in water ecosystems close to urban environments of the Barcelona provincial area, is signed by the experts Oriol Cano Rocabayera, Adolfo de Sostoa, Luis Call and Alberto Maceda, from the Faculty of Biology and the Biodiversity Research Institute of the University of Barcelona, Urbio. An exotic species threatening local fish. The mosquito fish, Gambusia holbrooki, is an Ediaceous exotic fish regarded as one of the most dangerous invasive species at a global scale according to the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, UICN. It was brought to Spain in 1921 for the biological control of mosquitoes, carrying diseases such as malaria, and is now included in the catalogues of exotic invasive species of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food and the autonomous communities. This species is especially present in the southern western areas of the peninsula, the Mediterranean coast and the Ebro Basin. In general, it is found in habitats with warm waters, with a low or no flow, and shallow waters, in general, wetlands and the shallow waters in rivers and areas with agricultural activity or peri-urban areas affected by pollution. In the peninsular area, it is a competitive predator that has forced local species to move, such as the Spanish toothcarp Aphaneus iberis, the Valencia toothcarp Valencia hispanica, the Andalusian toothcarp Aphaneus baeticus, and the three-spined stickleback Gastrosteus acillatus, apart from other amphibians and invertebrates. Exotic mosquito fish, strategies to survive under adverse conditions. Its high fecundity, sexual precocity, tolerance to environmental pollution and competitive superiority are factors that make its monitoring more difficult if the only strategies to preserve biodiversity in the water ecosystem are based on the improvement of water or the natural habitat, notes researcher Oriol Cano Rocabayera, first author of the article and member of the Department of Evolutionary Biology, Ecology and Environmental Sciences of the UB and Urbio. If some mosquito fish enter a new habitat or when there are a few of them after a control action to remove the population, this exotic species is able to increase its fecundity rate to balance the population imbalance. However, if the population of mosquito fish is stable and abundant, the fecundity lowers but new mosquito fish are bigger and have more chances of surviving, says Cano. Changes in water regime, building of dams, canalizations, etc. favor the presence of certain exotic species, like the mosquito fish, that prefer water with low flow. In general, the restoration of the hydrological regime has the best strategy to control invasive species. However, preventing the arrival of these and removing the populations of mosquito fish in the available ecosystems are the most effective actions for their control. Nevertheless, their small size, the wide range of tolerance, their diet and connectivity of water ecosystems makes this control and their removal very expensive and difficult. The new study reveals that habitats with abundant water plants, for example, naturalized dams and well-preserved environments, improve the physical condition of mosquito fish. Therefore, the complexity of the habitat is a factor that brings more praise and shelter against the attack of the predators. The mosquito fish's survival in high salinity waters is difficult, and these waters are now the natural habitat where the Spanish toothcarp is limited to, comments Cano Rocabayera. The danger of releasing exotic animals in the environment. The global distribution of this invasive species, found in all continents but for the Antarctica, is related to the areas where it was introduced a century ago due to the biological control of mosquitoes that carried malaria. Therefore, the most recent outbreaks of tropical diseases transmitted via mosquitoes, Zika, chikungunya and Papatachi fever, make it essential to extreme the surveillance on the effects of the introduction of these exotic fish in the local fauna, especially in tropical regions with a high biodiversity. According to the authors of the study, we need to apply more effective control measures on the small water masses, that is, in habitats where the complete removal of the population can be guaranteed. Also, we need to raise awareness among people on the danger of releasing exotic animals in the natural environment. Social media data reveal benefits or threats to biodiversity by visitors to nature locations. Secretary bird, Sagittarius serpentarius, Africa, stock image. The species is threatened by human intrusion and disturbance, according to the IUCN Red List. Credit, copyright Sichkarenko_com, Adobe stock. Understanding how people use and experience important places for living nature is essential for effectively managing and monitoring human activities and conserving biodiversity. In a new article published in the journal Science of the Total Environment, a team of researchers assessed global patterns of visitation rates, attractiveness and pressure to more than 12,000 important bird and biodiversity areas (IBAs), which are sites of international significance for nature conservation, by using geolocated data mined from social media, Twitter and Flickr. The study found that important bird and biodiversity areas located in Europe and Asia, and in temperate biomes, had the highest density of social media users. Results also showed that sites of importance for congregatory species, which were also more accessible, more densely populated and provided more tourism facilities, received higher visitation than did sites richer in bird species. Resources in biodiversity conservation are woefully inadequate, and novel data sources from social media provide openly available user-generated information about human-nature interactions, at an unprecedented spatio-temporal scale, says Dr. Anna Hausman from the University of Helsinki, a conservation scientist leading the study. Our group has been exploring and validating data retrieved from social media to understand people's preferences for experiencing nature in national parks at a local, national and continental scale, she continues. In this study, we expand our analyses at a global level. Tourism is one of the fastest growing industries worldwide, and conservation areas are becoming popular destinations for people seeking nature-based experiences. Important bird and biodiversity areas represent some of the most important places for nature across the planet. Our results now allow us to pinpoint which of these sites face potentially the greatest threats or greatest opportunities resulting from high numbers of visitors, says Dr. Stuart Butchart, chief scientist at BirdLife International, who co-authored the study. Social media content and metadata contain useful information for understanding human-nature interactions in space and time, says Professor Tuuli Toivonen, another co-author in the paper and the leader of the Digital Geography Lab at the University of Helsinki. Social media data can also be used to cross-validate and enrich data collected by conservation organizations, she continues. The study found that the 17% of all important bird and biodiversity areas (IBA) that were assessed by experts to be under greater human disturbance also had higher density of social media users. Therefore, these sites should be priority for management actions aimed at minimizing pressure at sites. However, data on threats do not yet exist for many highly visited important bird and biodiversity areas, even in North America and Europe. Mobilizing such data worldwide should be priority, says Dr. Thomas Brooks, chief scientist of IUCN, who also co-authored the paper. With the increasing use of social media worldwide, automatic content analysis of digital data sources will help us understand present or emerging human-related threats at sites where threats are currently unknown or difficult to assess, says adjunct professor Enrico D. Minin, senior co-author who leads the Helsinki Lab of Interdisciplinary Conservation Science at the University of Helsinki. We are currently applying and developing machine learning and natural language processing methods to analyze large amount of online information, in order to understand human-nature interactions and inform conservation science and practice, he concludes. Soil communities threatened by destruction, instability of Amazon forests. The clearing and subsequent instability of Amazonian forests are among the greatest threats to tropical biodiversity conservation today. Although the devastating consequences of deforestation to plants and animal species living above the ground are well documented, scientists and others need to better understand how soil communities respond to this deforestation to create interventions that protect biodiversity and the ecosystem. But that information has been lacking. A team of researchers led by Colorado State University's Andre Franco, a research scientist in the Department of Biology, conducted a meta-analysis of nearly 300 studies of soil biodiversity in Amazonian forests and sites in various stages of deforestation and land use. The new study, Amazonian Deforestation and Soil Biodiversity, is published in the June issue of Conservation Biology and is co-authored by CSU Distinguished Professor Diana Wall, Bruno Sobral, Professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology and Pathology at CSU, and Artur Silva, Professor at the Universidade Federal do Pará in Belém, Brazil. Overall, the researchers found that the abundance, biomass, richness and diversity of soil fauna and microbes were all reduced following deforestation. Soil fauna or animals that were studied include earthworms, millipedes, dung beetles, nematodes, mites, spiders and scorpions. Franco, who hails from Brazil, said that this is the first time that all of the available scientific data related to soil biodiversity in Amazonian forests has been synthesized. The research team also found that the way the land is used after the forest has cleared matters to soil biodiversity. Species of invertebrates such as earthworms, ants and termites, which are described as soil engineers, were more vulnerable to the displacement of forests with pastures than by crops, while microbes showed the opposite pattern. Franco said the highest biodiversity losses were found on the side of the Amazon with the highest mean annual precipitation and in areas where the soil was very acidic. That means these areas should be higher priorities for conservation efforts, he said. Scientists also uncovered gaps in existing research. Very few studies looked at the impact of disturbances like wildfires and selective logging on these forests, Franco said. Yet logging is an official management strategy in the Amazon forest. In addition, the team found a lack of data from 7 of the 9 countries that the Amazon biome covers parts of, including Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname and French Guiana. Sobral noted that biodiversity is a hot topic and was elevated recently with the release of a report from the United Nations, which found that nature is declining globally at unprecedented rates. But most of the scientific knowledge in the world about biodiversity relates to birds and mammals, he said. The team is continuing this research in the Amazon, working with farmers' associations and 2 research institutes in Brazil to collect and analyze soil samples with the goal of studying the consequences of this loss of biodiversity. Zaid Abdo, a bioinformatics expert and associate professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology and Pathology, has joined the CSU-based research team. Sobral said it's extremely important that the scientists work with local farmers and others who are impacted by the deforestation. We're very focused on making sure the research isn't disconnected from local communities' needs and aspirations, he said. Our work is guided by what the farmers want to know and how scientific knowledge could shape their future sustainable development. Conservation goals compete at the expense of biodiversity with an ever-growing list of threats facing biodiversity on multiple scales. Conservationists struggle to determine which to address. A common reaction is to prioritize their efforts on threats to individual species or management areas, but researchers say this narrow-minded approach is detrimental to the overall goal of saving species and ecosystems worldwide. Instead, in an article published May 23 in the journal Trends in Ecology and Evolution, they say large-scale, long-term collaboration is the answer. We are in a pivotal moment when we cannot just protect species from immediate and localized threats, says Louise Ashton, assistant professor in the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. We also need to prepare for future threats and protect against threats that function at large spatial scales. However, the limited resources available in conservation disciplines hinders the ability for broader collaboration with other scientists as well as between local, regional, and international agencies. In fact, it is not uncommon that due to limited resources, conservation biologists must downplay the importance of other research to secure funding for their own. The authors warn that this lack of collaboration is of particular concern as interactions between local and global-scaled threats, when left unacknowledged, can combine and become much more difficult to manage. In coral reefs, for example, the reef's health may be reduced by local stressors like nutrient runoff from agriculture or localized overfishing. Then, when global stressors come into play, like ocean warming and acidification, the result is more devastating than what would be observed in a healthy reef. Such cascading effects, the authors say, could be better prevented by multi-regional, coordinated conservation efforts. To get away from the compartmentalized approach to conservation, we need to re-evaluate funding and publishing models to find ways to encourage integrative research that considers current and future threats, says Timothy Bonebreak at Bonebreaking, an associate professor also in the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. This means involving social scientists, local stakeholders, and political leaders as well. Although climate change is center stage as the current worldwide threat to biodiversity, other challenges of equal magnitude are looming on the horizon. Hazards like nitrogen pollution and the impacts of soil microplastic residues top that list, the authors write. Ultimately, if we can aim for win-win conservation interventions, which mitigate the impacts of multiple threats, then it doesn't matter which threat is perceived to be the biggest, says Ashton. Wild chimpanzees eat tortoises after cracking them open against tree trunks. An international team of researchers from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig and the University of Osnabrück, Germany, have observed wild chimpanzees in the Loango National Park, Gabon, eating tortoises. They describe the first observations of this potentially cultural behavior where chimpanzees hit tortoises against tree trunks until the tortoises' shells break open and then feed on the meat. We have known for decades that chimpanzees feed on meat from a variety of animal species, but until now the consumption of reptiles has not been observed, says Tobias Deschner, a primatologist at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology. What is particularly interesting is that they use a percussive technique that they normally employ to open hard-shelled fruits to gain access to meat of an animal that is almost inaccessible for any other predator. The researchers studied the behavior of chimpanzees of the newly habituated Recombo community. They observed 38 prey events by 10 different chimpanzees in the dry season, a period when other preferred foods such as fruits is abundant. Sometimes, younger animals or females were unable to crack open the tortoise on their own. They then regularly handed the tortoise over to a stronger male who cracked the tortoise's shell open and shared the meat with all other individuals present, says Simone Pica, first author of the study and a cognitive scientist at the University of Osnabrück. Leftovers from dinner. There was one exceptional case in which an adult male, who was on his own, cracked a tortoise, ate half of it up while sitting in a tree and then tucked the rest of it in a tree fork. He climbed down, built his nest in a nearby tree and came back the next morning to retrieve the leftovers and continue to feast on them for breakfast. This indicates that chimpanzees may plan for the future, says Pica. The ability to plan for a future need, such as for instance hunger, has so far only been shown in non-human animals in experimental and/or captive settings. Many scholars still believe that future-oriented cognition is a uniquely human ability. Our findings thus suggest that even after decades of research, we have not yet grasped the full complexity of chimpanzees' intelligence and flexibility. Deschner adds, wild chimpanzee behavior has been studied now for more than 50 years and at more than 10 long-term field sites all across tropical Africa. It is fascinating that we can still discover completely new facets of the behavioral repertoire of this species as soon as we start studying a new population. The authors further emphasize the importance of non-human primate field observations to inform theories of hominin evolution. As one of our closest living relatives, the study of chimpanzee behavior is a window into our own history and evolution, says Pica. To prevent this window from closing once and for all, we need to do whatever we can to secure the survival of these fascinating animals in their natural habitats across Africa, concludes Deschner.